Picture this. It's 1975. You're in India. And the political temperature is, well, it's sky high.
It really is. The emergency has just been declared.
Exactly. So freedom of expression is deeply curtailed.
Yeah.
And you have these government censors who are operating on like a hair trigger.
They're scrutinizing every single piece of cultural output intensely.
And into this tense, this highly controlled environment, a film drops. A film that will go on to run for 5 straight years.
In a single theater in Mumbai.
A single theater. And it eventually becomes, and this is without any exaggeration, a foundational cultural mythology. It's quoted and reenacted for half a century.
It's a phenomenon that, I mean, it truly defies typical box office metrics, even cultural metrics. It is still the benchmark against which modern Indian cinema is judged. We are talking, of course, about Sholay.
And that cultural footprint is just staggering to think about. I mean, it's the source of that immortal, meme-worthy, but also absolutely chilling line.
Kitne aadmi?
How many men were there?
Okay.
Exactly. It gave us this ideal of friendship embodied by these 2 petty criminals that is still celebrated.
Oh, absolutely. The definition of friendship.
And 50 years later, you still hear these dialogues quoted at weddings. You hear them used as political commentary, spoofed in. I mean, every advertisement you can possibly imagine.
Right.
Its language just entered the public consciousness, and it never left.
It has this almost mythical status, yeah. And it's cemented by its sheer ubiquity, its longevity. And so for you, the international cinephile listening to this, the core mystery we really want to unpack today is precisely this. How did this foundational piece of Indian cinema, India's own, very self-aware Wild West saga, become not just a local blockbuster, but a global cinematic force, one that's celebrated and studied right alongside the classics it was meant to emulate?
That's the mission. Our deep dive today is going to analyze the dense layers of source material that reveal the film's precise international DNA, its shocking rocky road to legend, because despite its fame, you have to remember, its initial reception was disastrous.
A total disaster.
And what I think is most fascinating for film historians, the controversial, violent, original ending, the one that was censored and kept from the public for almost 40 years. We're looking at how they borrowed structure, but fundamentally, they built soul. Okay, so let's unpack this idea, this borrowing of structure. We have to start with the foundational truth, which, the film's creators, director Ramesh Sippy and that legendary writing duo Salim-Javed, they never tried to hide this.
No, not at all.
Sholay is fundamentally, and I think lovingly, an homage to the Western genre, specifically the European-born spaghetti Western.
What's genuinely fascinating here is the sheer audacity of it, the technical success of this deliberate, almost architectural borrowing. This wasn't some, accidental or subconscious thing.
Right, it wasn't a coincidence.
No. The production documentation, it reveals that they were intensely studying the blueprint laid down by European cinema, and particularly by the maestro Sergio Leone and his collaborators. They saw a formula, a kind of dark moral ambiguity overlaid onto this epic landscape.
And they saw that it was universal.
It was universal, but it hadn't yet been fully localized with a compelling emotional center. That was the gap they saw.
And when you look at the DNA of the film, it's not just a nod. It's practically a structural checklist of classic Western tropes that they adapted to an Indian setting.
Precisely. We can start with the setting itself. You have these dusty, lawless landscapes. In this case, it's the fictional village of Ramgarh.
Right.
And the sources detail how they consciously chose the rugged terrain of Ramanagoram in Karnataka. It's a place that visually just embodied that frontier town aesthetic, a place where the rule of law has clearly visibly broken down. So that physical setting immediately signals Western.
And it's not just the location, it's the visual grammar.
Yeah.
The spaghetti westerns are so famous for their stylized cinematography.
Yeah.
The extreme close-ups on the eyes.
The 1,000-yard stares.
Yes. And then the wide shots emphasizing how isolated the characters are against this desolate landscape. Did Sippy manage to translate that successfully?
He absolutely did. And that's a real testament to the skill of the technical team. The documentation from the shoot, it shows Sippy deliberately using those visual markers. Think of those sudden, tight close-ups on Thakur Baldev Singh's eyes.
Burning with vengeance.
Yes, eyes that are burning with this desire for vengeance. And then that's juxtaposed immediately with the vast, arid plains of Ramgarh, which emphasizes the smallness of this one conflict against the immensity of the desolation around it.
And that technique, that's straight from Leone.
Directly from Leone, it ratchets up the emotional tension without needing a single word of dialogue.
So beyond the camera work, you have the specific narrative elements. I mean, the concept of bounty hunters, right? That's our two protagonists, Jai and Viru, brought in by Thakur to solve this deeply rooted local problem of dacoity, or banditry.
And then there's the theme of the single-minded revenge quest. That's what's driving the whole central moral conflict of the film.
And we can't overlook the violence.
We cannot. Spaghetti westerns, I mean, they push the envelope so far beyond what their American counterparts were doing in the 60s. They introduced this gritty, almost nihilistic brutality.
And Sippy just ran with it.
He followed suit completely.
Yeah.
The level of violence depicted in Sholay, the gang attacks, the graphic display of physical trauma, it was unprecedented for Indian cinema at that time.
Which, as we said at the top, is exactly what got the film to deep trouble with those very nervous 1975 censors. It just proves how faithfully they translated that dark, gritty, often shocking edge of the European genre.
And the structural formula they use is, it's impeccable. You need two mismatched heroes. One gives you the cynicism, the other gives you the comedy.
Yeah.
And they have to be pitted against a terrifying, larger-than-life, and yet somehow strangely charismatic villain.
Okay.
That core engine is the essence of Sholay's narrative.
So for the cinephiles out there listening who really want that checklist, let's nail down those direct cinematic touchstones. The link to Sergio Leone's body of work is just. It's undeniable in the structure and the tone.
The analyses we've seen, they all point to a few crucial precursors. There's the communal defense structure, right? The call for help against bandits, which echoes the Magnificent Seven.
Which itself was an adaptation of Kurosawa's Seven Samurai.
Exactly. It shows that beautiful transnational flow of narrative tropes. It's not theft, it's evolution. And you see elements of the epic scale and that high-stakes tension borrowed from later Leone films like Once Upon a Time in the West.
But if we're really looking for the clearest, most direct structural precursor, especially when you think about that dynamic triangle of the moral center, the Kur, the secondary heroes, Jai and Viru, and then the ultimate antagonist, Gabbar,
then it has to be Leone's ultimate masterpiece, the good, the bad, and the ugly. No question. Sholay borrows that specific grand canvas, that epic sense of destiny, and that high-stakes, almost mythological confrontation between forces of darkness and light, all dressed in ambiguity.
So this extensive borrowing, it led foreign critics to famously coin the term curry western. Now that label is, okay, it's accurate on a purely mechanical level, but I think it risks being way too simplistic. It kind of reduces a transformative work to just imitation.
You've raised such an essential point. It acknowledges the Western framework, sure, but it completely fails to recognize the seismic transformation that happened. Sholay took that Western scaffolding and just saturated it with cultural specifics.
Yeah.
It wasn't merely a Western set in India with Indian actors. The critical sources call it a brilliant, deeply localized emotional remix, and it was absolutely drenched in masala.
Let's elaborate on masala for a second. For anyone unfamiliar, it's not just a flavor profile. In cinema, it's a necessary strategy. It refers to that blend of multiple genres you need for commercial success in Indian cinema.
All in one package.
Action, drama, heightened romance, comedy, and crucially, musical numbers, all packaged tightly together.
And that blend is the critical distinction. That's what makes it more than a Western. A true spaghetti Western is often cynical, it's sparse. Sholay, however, is rich in melodrama. We have those poignant flashback sequences explaining Thakur's loss.
Heartbreaking.
We have the romantic subplot between Viru and the vivacious Basanti, and that heartbreaking unspoken affection between Jai and the widow, Radha. These elements, family honor, tragic romance, unbreakable loyalty, they elevate the film beyond just genre homage and root it so deeply in local storytelling tradition.
So it demonstrates that Sholay was operating within this long-standing, globally aware Indian cinematic tradition of taking powerful foreign structures and then successfully adapting and localizing them.
Exactly right. And the sources, they continually reinforce this pattern. Think of the adaptation of Shakespeare's tragedies into films like Makbul, which is Macbeth, or Omkara, Othello.
Brilliant films.
Incredible films that relocated classic tragedy to the modern Indian underworld. They made the moral complexity relevant to contemporary political and social dynamics. We took The Godfather and we created Sarkar, expertly deifying the tale of organized crime into a narrative about a local political dynasty.
So Salim-Javed and Sippy, they didn't invent this process. They just perfected it for the action-adventure genre, and they proved that the foundation of the Wild West could be successfully planted in Ramgarh.
Absolutely. The core insight that the writers had, and which the sources emphasize again and again as the reason for its lasting success, is that you must borrow structure but build soul. They didn't just replicate dusty shootouts, they integrated the essential emotional currents of Indian life. Unbreakable male friendship, the sanctity of family honor, and that powerful yearning for justice when the system fails you.
Right.
This infusion of emotional depth, that's the soul, and that's why it resonated so profoundly locally, and why it's endured globally as a truly original piece of cinema that speaks a universal language of conflict and camaraderie.
And the soul of the film, it rests not just on the melodrama, but on these unforgettable characters who, they quickly transcended just being functional in a plot and became cultural institutions. Let's start with that central relationship, the real beating heart of Sholay.
Yeah.
The friendship between Jai and Viru.
Amitabh Bachchan and Dharmendra. As Jai and Viru, they achieved a chemistry that became the literal definition of male friendship in Indian pop culture for decades. Their dynamic is the quintessential Western mismatched pair. You have Jai, the wise, cynical, often silent one who's always thinking 2 steps ahead. The thinker. And then you have Viru, the loud, hilarious, romantic, and often impulsive one. They're just small-time criminals who somehow manage to embody a higher moral code than the world they actually inhabit.
And their interactions are what really inject that necessary humor and lightness into what is otherwise a very dark film. Think about that iconic scene where Viru is trying to convince the very taciturn Jai to propose to Radha using a coin toss.
Which we later realize.
Jai is manipulating every single time. It's a 2-headed coin.
That scene is brilliant. And it's not just for the comedy, it's for what it reveals about their relationship. It shows Jai's deep, protective love for Viru and his willingness to sacrifice his own happiness, his own potential romance, just to facilitate his friends. It elevates them beyond simple anti-heroes. It makes their loyalty feel almost mythic. Their song, Yeah Dosti, it's not just background music, it's an anthem.
It is an anthem. But the entire mission, the whole conflict, it originates with the man who hires them. Pakur Baldev Singh, played by the tremendous Sanjeev Kumar. He functions as the true moral center of the film, and he's defined entirely by trauma and this desperate need for resolution.
Thakur is the representative of the legitimate establishment. He's a former police officer. But his authority has been violently shattered by the villain. So his role is to bridge the world of law, which he once represented.
And the world of vigilante action.
Which he now has to fund. Exactly.
And his complexity is the film's tragic core. The sources discuss how his motivation is this unquenchable thirst for justice, but because the law proves so utterly incapable of dealing with the sheer demonic evil of Gabbar, he's forced to outsource the violence.
Right.
And that decision to hire 2 known criminals confirms he is willing to blur the lines between law and revenge.
And we cannot underestimate the power of that iconic physical detail, the former police officer with no hands. The scene that details his horrific mutilation is just. It's a visceral explanation for his consuming vengeance. He is literally incapable of enforcing the law or executing his own revenge, which makes his reliance on Jai and Viru both practical and, tragically symbolic.
It sets the stage for the film's moral dilemma. So the Thakur is this solemn, tragic foundation, but the entire narrative weight, all the terror, it rests on the shoulders of the antagonist.
That's right. A film is so often measured by the quality of its villain, and in this respect, Sholay delivered something generational.
We have to dedicate some serious time to the apex predator, Gabbar Singh.
Amjad Khan's Gabbar is, he's universally recognized as Bollywood's most iconic villain, perhaps in all of Indian cinema history. And what makes him so potent is that combination of menace, unpredictable sadism, and a really unique performance style. He is psychological horror before he's ever physical violence.
It's the sheer performance style that just captivates you. Those dramatic, extended pauses before he delivers a line. It's like you're waiting for a cobra to strike.
Yes.
That menacing, almost theatrical laugh.
Yeah.
And the terrifying quote, Jo dar gaya, som jo mar gaya. He who is scared is dead. He weaponized fear.
And importantly, he had a very distinct regionalized dialect and accent in his Hindi. And according to contemporary reviews, that added to his localized menace.
Yeah.
He wasn't just some generic bandit. He felt like a distinct, terrifying warlord from a known, frightening region of the country.
For our cinephile audience, we can trace Gabbar's DNA directly back to the darker figures of the spaghetti westerns. He is the ultimate composite villain.
Oh, absolutely. The sources link his archetype specifically to characters from Leone's films. He has the unpredictable, wild, almost almost humorous savagery of Tuco.
From the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yes. And that's balanced seamlessly with the cold, calculating, and cynical cruelty of Angel Eyes. Gabbar inherits that terrifying mix of unpredictability and total professional ruthlessness.
And the musical accompaniment to this villain is what truly transcends the genre and connects it globally. It proves the film was so keenly aware of its influences. We have to talk about the specific soundscape of evil created by the musical director, R.D. Burman.
This is where the homage really reaches its deepest artistic level. R.D. Burman, a legend in Indian music in his own right, created a score for Gabbar that is chilling, it's sparse, and it's utterly distinctive. It relies so heavily on percussion and these unsettling motifs, often using non-traditional instruments to create a sense of impending doom.
It's the way the music signals Gabbar's arrival. It's not some grand orchestral swell. It's a tight, almost claustrophobic sound.
Exactly. One critical analysis we studied, it explicitly compares Burman's work for Gabbar to a character walking straight out of an Ennio Morricone soundtrack. Burman understood Morricone's method.
What was that?
Relying on these repetitive, anxiety-inducing motifs and unconventional sounds, whistles, bells, harsh drums, to create psychological dread rather than just, action background music. This dramatic weight in the sound design, it signals Gabbar's power and connects the film directly to the global cinematic tradition of the spaghetti Western score.
And that's the final genius of the character in the film. Despite these clear global technical and musical influences, Gabbar is still uniquely Indian in his cruelty, his wit, his strange charisma. He's a mythological figure of terror, one the audience fears, but you can't help quoting him. Sholay took these Western archetypes and made them feel entirely domestically owned. It just proves that localization is the key to universal appeal. So here is where the story truly becomes mythological, because it flies in the face of what the film eventually became. You would logically assume a film with this massive budget, this incredible cast, this powerhouse writing duo, that was an immediate, overwhelming smash hit.
Of course.
But you'd be operating without the full history.
This is the crucial, surprising historical detail that defines Sholay's journey. It initially bombed. The film that eventually ran for 5 years started as a catastrophic commercial and critical failure. The sources detail a period of just outright panic among the producers.
We really need to understand that initial failure. The sources reveal that the early reviews were just absolutely brutal. Critics were clearly confused by this unprecedented blending of the gritty, slow-burn Western structure with the hyper-emotional musical masala elements. They were merciless.
They completely misunderstood the pacing and the ambition. There's one contemporary critique from India today that called it a dead ember.
A dead ember.
That's a stunning condemnation for what was supposed to be the biggest film of the decade. Other critics, they focused on the film's unusual length, complaining that the 3-hour runtime was indulgent and the violence was excessive and, unnecessary. They simply hadn't seen a genre hybrid of this scale before.
It was a film ahead of its time. It was pushing boundaries of what Indian audiences and critics expected, and that initial audience response, it mirrored the critics' confusion.
Absolutely disheartening, as the sources report. In those first few weeks, theaters experienced this palpable silence. There was no laughter at the comic interludes. There was no applause at the action sequences. Nothing. The producers were convinced they had poured vast resources. It was the most expensive film made in India up to that point, into an expensive artistic disaster. They were reportedly contemplating drastic measures.
Like what?
Including shooting a completely new climax just to try and salvage the opening.
Wow. So panic sets in. The film is tanking. How on earth did this expensive experiment transition from a flop to an unstoppable juggernaut?
The sources explain that around the third week, something magical and profoundly organic, it began to turn. This is the moment when the film transitioned from being a product that was simply marketed to becoming a shared cultural experience. It was a word-of-mouth revolution.
And it was centered entirely on the film's linguistic genius.
Exactly. People weren't just returning for a second viewing, they were specifically returning to memorize the dialogue.
That's amazing.
The quotes became viral before viral was a concept. People began repeating Gabbar's lines on the streets. They started mimicking Jai and Viru's banter in everyday conversation. This became the currency of the street. The audience realized the film's richness lay not just in its action sequences, but in the power and the quotability of its script.
And we have a unique, immeasurable metric to prove that this turnaround was dialogue-driven, the famous dialogue record phenomenon.
This detail is just astonishing, and it confirms the film's unique place in cultural history. Polydor, the music label, recognized the sudden explosion of quotability, and they released a 48-minute record composed only of the film's dialogues.
No music, no visuals.
Nothing, just the audio tracks of the conversations and the monologues, interspersed with the characteristic sound effects.
And the sales numbers for that spoken word album.
It sold 500,000 copies.
Incredible.
That is an astonishing, unprecedented success metric for a dialogue album. It proved conclusively that the spoken word, the characterization, the sheer charisma of Gabbar, and the chemistry of Jai and Viru were the elements that saved the film. It cemented its linguistic and quotational status in Indian culture, even when the visual spectacle initially didn't land.
That's just unbelievable. It fundamentally saved the film because the language became inescapable. So once the dialogue took hold and the word of mouth spread, the rest of the film's elements, the action, the romance, the scale, they all finally found their place in the cultural conversation.
Precisely. The film went from being an expensive experiment to an unstoppable juggernaut, and its legacy metrics are truly staggering. They showcase its cultural domination.
Let's run those numbers.
Okay. It ran for 5 straight, continuous years at Mumbai's Minerva Theatre. That's an almost unheard of run in global cinema history. This wasn't just a hit. It became an institution.
Right.
And beyond the sheer longevity, the critical reappraisal followed. It was ultimately voted Film of the Millennium by BBC India, placing it above a century's worth of phenomenal and diverse cinematic output.
And to highlight its enduring universal appeal, you just have to consider its continued performance in neighboring countries. The sources note its spectacular run when it was finally officially released in Pakistan in 2015. That's 40 years after its initial premiere.
It didn't just perform well, it still outperformed most contemporary films being released that year. 40 years later, and it's still crushing the competition based purely on its cultural memory and its enduring entertainment value. It fully justifies that famous quote from the distributor, Shyam Shroff, who so succinctly captured its eternal presence. The sun never sets on Sholay.
It really became timeless.
And if the box office turnaround was a shock, the fact that the version loved by millions for decades was not the director's original vision is, well, it's perhaps the central and most important controversy for film scholars when analyzing Sholay.
Right.
The version seen by the masses for generations is a compromise cut.
And this brings us right back to that tense political environment of 1975 that we started with, the emergency and the heightened sensitivity to violence and institutional integrity. Ramesh Sippy and the writers, they had crafted an ending that perfectly paid off Thakur Baldev Singh's unquenchable thirst for justice. But the government was clear. They could not allow it.
We have to detail the original ending to understand the controversy and the moral impact of the censorship. In Sippy's original cut, the climax saw Thakur finally cornering Gabbar. He doesn't just beat him, he delivers a truly brutal, highly visceral form of poetic justice.
Also,
The sources specify that Thakur uses his feet, which are now encased in spike shoes, a powerful, almost primal weapon, to violently crush Gabbar to death. It's a moment of morally ambiguous, yet emotionally unambiguous vengeance.
it's the ultimate payoff for the man who lost his family and his hands. It closes his tragic arc. But the censors drew a hard line in the dust. And they did so based on institutional political grounds, not just because of the gore.
That political implication was the ultimate veto point, and it's crucial context for understanding censorship during the emergency. Censors were already on edge because of the political climate. They feared anything that could be interpreted as undermining state authority.
So it wasn't just the violence.
The violence was excessive, yes, but the sources emphasized that the political argument was paramount. They stated they couldn't allow a former police officer to take the law into his own hands.
That is a fascinating example of the state intervening to preserve a specific moral message during a time of high political control. The message they demanded was that justice must be served by the state, by the system, not by individual vigilante action, even if the vigilante is a former, respected police officer seeking vengeance. The rule of law, however fragile, must be upheld on screen.
Exactly. The original ending celebrated vigilante justice and the failure of the institution. The state demanded the opposite. It demonstrated the direct, chilling influence of the political environment on the artistic output, forcing a compromise on the film's moral core.
So what was the immediate result for the filmmakers? They just had to accept it.
They had to. It was an immediate mandatory reshoot. Director Ramesh Sippy faced massive pressure. He was forced to rush the cast and crew back to the rocky terrain of Ramanagaram to film an entirely new finale. The famous ending that we all know, where Gabbar is battered, he's defeated, but crucially, he is merely captured and handed over to the police. That was a result of this forced change.
And that change profoundly alters the moral weight, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It completely softens the moral edge. It allows the state to retain authority, and importantly, it protects the image of a former police officer. For decades, that censored version was the only one that existed. And the film's legacy, its catharsis, was built on that slightly compromised conclusion.
For 40 years, yeah. Film enthusiasts and scholars, they knew a more powerful, a darker ending existed, but it was locked away. But as cinephiles, we always yearn for the artist's original, unadulterated vision. And the good news is that the effort to restore that original, intended version has finally paid off.
Tell us about the restoration process, because this really signifies Sholay's rise to true global cinematic importance. It's not just a local blockbuster anymore, it's a preserved artifact of world cinema.
It was an exhaustive and challenging endeavor. The sources detail a painstaking 3-year restoration process. The original negatives were often degraded, and the original uncut reel was difficult to find and stabilize. But the result is monumental. The original uncut version, complete with the intended, brutal ending and other previously deleted scenes, is now accessible. This represents the ultimate homecoming of the artist's vision, giving the film its rightful place in history.
And the location of its global premiere speaks volumes about its recognized stature. It confirms its place in the global pantheon of classic cinema.
It absolutely does. The restored, uncut version premiered not in some major commercial multiplex, but at the Il Cinema Ritrovato Festival in Bologna, Italy. This is one of Europe's premier festivals dedicated specifically to film restoration and preservation.
Wow.
And it was shown on one of Europe's largest open-air screens. That venue choice confirms that the global community views Sholay as a cinematic landmark that requires scholarly preservation. Film lovers across the globe are finally getting to see the true, brutal, intended ending, allowing them to finally judge the film as its creators designed it. When we look at the legacy of Sholay 50 years on, its cinematic achievement it's just profound. It defined what Indian commercial cinema could be: epic in scope, emotional in depth, and universally accessible. It managed to borrow the best structural elements the world had to offer and adapt them into something completely unapologetically Indian. It is a film that successfully balances high-octane action with genuine, heartfelt, and ultimately tragic drama.
And what does that powerful resonance really boil down to? Why does a film from 1975 about a lawless town still speak to modern audiences across all these cultural boundaries?
Amitabh Bachchan offered perhaps the most insightful answer regarding the film's enduring appeal. He suggested that its success lies in the fact that it provided the victory of good over evil, and most importantly, poetic justice in 3 hours. You and I shall not get it in a lifetime.
That's powerful.
The film offers a catharsis, a moral clarity, and a definitive resolution that real life consistently denies us.
It provides the fantasy of definitive, visceral resolution, which is exactly what the censors tried to sanitize.
Indeed. Sholay proved that inspiration is evolution, not theft. It took the fundamental structural elements of the Wild West, the dusty roads, the avenging heroes, the iconic villain, and successfully transplanted and rooted them in Ramgarh, creating a mythology that will endure far longer than the political moment it was born into. It created something truly timeless by giving the audience exactly what they crave: justice.
So we have this cultural monument, and for 50 years, its emotional and moral core was fundamentally altered by a political censor board who demanded institutional authority be upheld. The victory of good over evil was shown, but that final brutal poetic justice was suppressed.
The film survived the censors, absolutely, but its moral punch was undeniably diluted until the restoration.
Which leaves us with a truly provocative thought for you, the learner. The entire legacy, the iconography, the cultural memory of Sholay were built around a captured villain, a relatively neat ending that upheld the state's authority. What fundamental meaning changes when we finally see the director's intended brutal poetic justice served by Thakur's spiked shoes? Does that original ending make Gabbar's status even darker, a villain who finally got what he deserved? Or does it simply complete Thakur's tragic, relentless arc, turning him from a figure of restraint into a definitive anti-hero who sacrifices his morality for vengeance?
A vigilante.
A true vigilante. That is the ultimate cinematic question now that the restoration is complete. It forces us to reevaluate what we thought we knew about India's most iconic film.
It's time to seek out the uncut version and decide for yourself where the true heart of Sholay lies.
Until next time, we hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the anatomy of India's definitive curry western.